to dedicate this shirt to all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael, including my three chavrusas over here that are not well. All three of you are not well, even if not in body, in the head. Love you lots. All right, let's get started.
Okay, so the next issue we are going to cover, let's just find it. Sorry. Okay. Where was that?
100% you too. Thank you. Catch you later. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, this is here, kindling a bonfire before Shabbat. Now, I mean, if it's the middle of winter, probably applies more to Europe, Northern Europe and America in winter, and places like Russia where it's freezing cold in winter. So it says, one may make a wood fire right before Shabbat only if there is enough time for it to ignite to the extent that the flame will continue on its own without adding extra wood chips. One may kindle a furnace in the same way as a wood fire. However, it is preferable for the wood to be completely burnt before Shabbos so as not to require a non-Jew to extinguish the remaining firebrands on Shabbos. One may make a fire with a single log only if the fire penetrates the majority of its thickness and outside circumference before Shabbos. One may make a fire even if the flame only caught slightly, if either A, the oven is sealed, and B, the fire is fueled with tar, sulfur, straw, and stubble, as well as wax, fat, or the like. According to some opinions, the same applies to a charcoal fire. Then just one other thing here, a reed or date pit fire. According to some opinions, if reeds or pits are scattered, it is sufficient for the flame to catch even slightly if the reeds are tied together or the pits are placed in a basket. They must burn until the flame goes up on its own. Some opinions say that the halacha is the opposite, but I don't think that really applies to us. Okay. So the main thing is you light it before Shabbos, and you're not, guys like us wouldn't add wood to the fire because that's what's the word? That's stimulating the fire. So we wouldn't do such a thing because we're very frum, all of us. We do it before Shabbos. We'd make sure there's enough wood. And if it went out, then unfortunate. Maybe a non-Jew could do it if it's a pressing need.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
I learn every day. So, basically, if you remember, Rava concluded his proof as follows. He said, learn from this that the contradiction is at the beginning of Hazamah. For in this case, the middle set of witnesses was contradicted by the first set of witnesses from the moment they testified. Thus, their testimony was already disregarded before the third set came along to render them zomimim. Thus, if not for the fact that we say that contradiction is considered the beginning of the Hazamah process, the middle witnesses would not be liable to pay the value of the eye when they subsequently exposed as zomimim, because the law of Hazamah is not applicable to witnesses whose testimony has already been nullified. So as you know, with Rava's opinion, it's as follows, is that if you have a case, we talked about the case of a slave, but again, if you have a case of two witnesses coming and saying that Reuven killed Shimon in Santon City in the parking lot, and then another group witnesses say that basically he was beaten severely, but he didn't die, and there's a third set of witnesses that come along and say the group that accused this innocent Reuven of killing Shimon when it didn't transpire, those witnesses are conspiring because they were with us on the day they said they witnessed this murder, and therefore we give the reciprocal death penalty, the hazamah, to the conspiring witnesses, and we are saying that is a chiddush. And you can only work that out if the hazamah process is at the beginning of the contradiction. because according to Abaye, if you've got your first two sets of witnesses contradicting each other, and a third set come and contradict the accusing witnesses, then in that particular case, there's no hazama reciprocal penalty, because the two witnesses contradicting each other before the third one comes along renders them invalidated, because we cannot believe either of them. And therefore, we do not apply the reciprocal penalty, even when the conspiring witnesses could never have witnessed that event. So that's the difference between Abaye and Rava. In a nutshell, we went through the case in terms of the slave. I'm not going to redo that. And
before you start, Damon, sorry, I just need the bathroom for a second. I'm sorry.
sure, no problem. I'll pause.
1 second.
Okay. So Abaye deflects that proof. Abaye said, no, the brisa does not refer to a case of three sets of witnesses, where the witnesses were contradicted even before they were exposed as omimim. So do any of you remember about the three sets of witnesses with regards to Rava's case, with regards to the slave? I'm not asking you stuff. I'm not actually forcing you into questioning, but if you don't know that, then we're going to have to mention it.
Let Gavin try first, and I'll try after Gavin.
He's feeling
I'm the wrong guy to try.
Now you know, Gavin. You know more than most of them.
No, normally I probably know it, but I'm battling to cope. My
okay.
brain fog is very severe today. It's terrible.
Can I try?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's with. Sorry, I just need to stand. I've been sitting many hours. So the case where the owner, the slave owner, took out an eye of the slave, and also there was another thing. What did he do? The other thing,
the tooth.
Another physical thing. Blinded the slave, and also knocked out a tooth. Knocked out a tooth.
Okay.
So if one set of witnesses says the tooth was knocked out first, then the eye, and another set of witnesses says the eye was knocked out, was blinded, and then the tooth, then they can't be accepted.
Okay, and therefore
That's one of the things, and therefore there's no there's no liability for those for the witnesses.
No, I mean, if you're quoting according to Abaye, that would be true, but not according to Rava. So Abaye and Rava don't see eye to eye on the tooth. Okay. So I tell you what, let me just put the case forward in a few sentences. I'm not going to go about how Rava was reinterpreted. Let me just go with the correct interpretation to save time. Okay. So the master knocked out the slave's tooth and then blinded his eye. Okay. So that was the first set of witnesses. And then the master, in addition to setting the slave free, must pay the slave the value of the eye. Because let's just discuss certain issues. If a body part was damaged, the slave goes free. Once he is a free man, then he can issue summons in his personal capacity as not part of the property of his master against his previous master as a free man for that secondary damage. Okay? So if you have a first set of witnesses and say that the first case was when the master knocked out the slave's tooth and blinded his eye, the master must free the slave and pay the value of the eye, which is the higher amount. Then there was a middle set of witnesses that came and said it was actually reversed. The master first blinded the slave's eye, rendering the slave free, and then hit him in the tooth, and then rendering him liable to pay for the tooth, because the eye is what set him free, and the tooth is what he now has to pay the slave as a free man. So the two witnesses don't agree with each other. So as you're saying, according to Abaye, in that case, even if they're Eidim Zomimim, even if they're witnesses that show one of them to be Eidim Zomimim afterwards, Kevin is right according to Abaye that it would certainly throw each other out, not the whole case, Kevin, because what you've got to bear in mind is they're not arguing in terms of how the master hit the slave. So that part of the testimony is not thrown out. The slave goes free. If both contradicting set of witnesses agree on the fact that the master hit the slave goes free. Where they're arguing is whether or not the master pays for the lower fee of the tooth or the higher fee of the eye. Higher fee of the eye being 100 zuz, lower fee of the tooth being 10 zuz, for example. Does that make sense? And you might say, well, how does a conflict occur? Well, if you look at a physical scuffle, guys, and you look at the screen, and look at me at the screen, and you see that. It's so quick. You don't know which came first. It's quick. So confusion can arise. But they do agree that the master damaged the slave and therefore he goes free. So what happens then is that which version do you think the master likes more, Kevin? The fact
with the tooth, because it's less. You have to do slave for less.
Exactly. So the master is very approving of the second set of witnesses that says the eye went out first, freeing the slave, and he only owes for the tooth. Okay. But then there are a third set of witnesses that claim that the middle set of witnesses are couldn't have viewed the event at all because they heard about it. The news like this travels fast, and they didn't like the master a lot at all. And they felt sorry for the slave, so they wanted the slave to get the higher amount because he'd been mistreated for years. Just no one ever caught him before. So in that case, the third set of witnesses said that the second set could not have witnessed the event because they were in a different location at the time. Therefore, in that particular case, Rava says that the middle witnesses have to now pay the master the value of an eye, because this is what they sought to falsely extract from the master. Okay, you might ask, if the slave concurred, why doesn't he have to pay for the eye? Well, here's a news flash, guys. How much money do you think the slave really has? So,
the slave or the slave master?
No, the slave. In other words, he probably concurred with the false witnesses. But they don't mention anything about the slave paying, probably because he doesn't have money. And secondly, he could claim he was confused. He said punches came from all directions. I don't know. I'm just saying. So the only ones that can really get the reciprocal penalty is not the slave, because he was at the event getting hit. You know what I'm saying? So it's the two false witnesses. But, Evan, what Rava is saying is that by logic, he's agreeing with the buyer, knock each other out. Because what happens is if there's contradicting testimony, they should cancel each other out. So the only thing they agree on is that the master hit the slave, therefore the slave goes free. No problem there. The part they disagree on is whether to pay for the eye or tooth. And there was a Gemara principle that says you cannot extract money unless you've got evidence. If somebody says they've hit your car, if you say you've hit somebody's hit your car, they're going to say, what's your proof? If you're going to extract money from your fellow, you need to bring proof. So in the absence of proof, we go with the lower amount because they both agree that there was damage done to free a slave, and they both agree in terms of two bodily injuries too. So therefore, we go for the lower amount. And but we learn from this that the hazama, the reciprocal penalty, is at the beginning of the process of contradiction of testimony, according to Rava, which Abaye doesn't agree. He said they've cancelled each other out. Now, if you have Adim Zomimim saying that one of the sets has said that the master hit the slave in the eye, they don't have to pay the reciprocal penalty for that for a very simple reason. They already contradicted prior to that, and since on that note they were contradicted, the court cannot take either of those claims as gospel because they're contradicting each other. Only that the slave is freed. So therefore, there's no reciprocal penalty on the eye. Rava is saying that there is, because there's this concept of hazama, the reciprocal penalty being implemented at the time where the contradiction first started. So the fact that they didn't agree, the first two sets of witnesses, and the third set said the second set couldn't have viewed the master hitting the slave first in the tooth and then the eye, therefore makes the Adem Zomamim with respect to the middle set of witnesses having to pay the master for the eye they sought to extract from him to give to the slave. So we see from that contradicting testimony is the beginning process of Hazan, according to Rava. I hope I've explained it well.
Can you just repeat that last line? Sorry, I just battled to absorb that last comment you made now.
Okay, so the last comment I made is learn from this that the contradiction is at the beginning of Hazamah, because in this case, the middle set of witnesses was contradicted by the first set of witnesses from the moment they testified. Thus, their testimony was already disregarded before the third set came along to render them Zomamim. At this point, Rava and Abaye agree. But Rava said there's an extra factor. Thus, if not for the fact that we say that contradiction is considered the beginning of the Hazamah process, in other words, Gavin's saying that it actually doesn't cancel each other out, but it just further proves that these witnesses were liars. The middle witnesses would not be liable to pay the value of the eye when they are subsequently exposed as Zomamim, unless you take this contradiction at the beginning of the Hazamah process. Do you see the distinction between Abaye and Rava?
Abaye doesn't look at that. He doesn't look at the third witnesses. He discounts them because the two cancel each other out.
Yes, whereas Rava is showing this.
Rava takes them into account. He reinforces because it's reinforcing I think it's the second one.
Correct. It's just proving that they're inconsistent. So why should they cancel each other out? And again, we learned another principle that where the witnesses agree, that part of the testimony, Kevin, is accepted. It's the point of their bone of contention where they contradict each other, that part we only enforce the defendant to pay the lower amount. In other words, it's not thrown out completely. What's thrown out is the higher value, but not completely, because they both said master hit slave. They both said there were two shots, bodily shots. So one was an eye on the tooth. It's the order we're arguing about. Okay, good. That's nice and clear. Arthur, I know you can't respond in terms of actual commentary, but can you just let me know that you understand thus far? Mate? Okay, understand. He's alive. We have a pulse. Thank God. Okay. Right, that's perfect. Obviously, Abaye deflects the proof. He has to deflect it in some way. And he says, no, the brisa does not refer to a case of three sets of witnesses, because he has to defend this brisa. Because if the brisa is talking about three sets of witnesses, then there's a problem. Then it's going to sound like Rava is correct. So, Gavin, you might say, well, how do we not know what the brisa said exactly? Do you remember the brisa was quite cryptic, and we spent the first part of last session interpreting what it meant? So, Abaye has got a different interpretation. He said it doesn't outrightly express that there are three sets of witnesses. Rather, the brisa refers to a case where there were only two sets, who testified that the master first blinded the slave's eye and then knocked out his tooth, and who exposed them as Zomamim. So the brisa is dealing with the case where the second set reversed the order of events and also exposed the first set as Zomamim. So this is the case. They testified that the master did inflict the two injuries, but in opposite order of the one claimed by the first set. Moreover, this occurred on a different day than claimed by the first set, and on the day they claimed to have seen the injuries occur, they were actually elsewhere and could not have witnessed the events. So those are the two features. Okay, so we say that there's a second set that says to the first set, how could you testify to having seen the master blind his slave's eye and then knock out his tooth on Sunday? You were with us at the braai in Emmerensha on Sunday. However, we agree with you that the master did inflict both injuries, but on a different day, on the Monday. And you heard about this on the Monday. We know you don't like the guy, so you cooked up the story of the Sunday. But the actual sequence was reversed. What we saw on the Monday was that he first knocked out the tooth and then blinded the eye. Does that make sense? So again, there's only two sets of witnesses. The first set there said that there was a knocking out the tooth and then the eye. And the second set said you couldn't have viewed that on the day you said you did because you were with us. This actually happened the following day, but the tooth was knocked out and then the eye. And what does that mean? It means, firstly, that the lying witnesses are on whose side? They're on the master's side because they are claiming the tooth was knocked out last. So what probably happened here is that they liked the owner, and the owner was nervous that this urban legend would go out. So they thought, let's be the first to claim it went out because he's going to get into trouble anyway. Either way, he's lost his slave because it's going to get out. There were witnesses. So let's reverse the order, so he only pays for a tooth, as that was the only part knocked out once the slave is free from the damage of the eye, if we say it like that. But if we say it how it really happened, that the tooth was hit and then the slave was free and could sue for the eye, that master would have to pay a lot more. So we actually want him to pay a lot less. So they were caught about lying about the day, as well as the sequence of events. Okay? And as a result of the second set's testimony, the slave, in fact, goes free. And why? Because neither of those groups dispute the fact that the master abused the slave. So the slave goes free because of his first walloping that he got in terms of his body. Okay? And the master must pay him for the loss of the eye, because the second set, having discredited the first, is believed that the tooth was destroyed first and then the eye. And the first witnesses, having found to be conspiring witnesses, Adim Zomamim, must pay the slave the value of the eye because they conspired to deprive him of that value it was deserving of, which was for the eye that was knocked out second. They said that the eye was knocked out first and then the tooth. So in fact, they've actually deprived the slave. They've actually deprived the slave of that extra value of his eye, so that they have to make restitution for. Okay. So, according to this explanation, there's no longer any necessity, guys, to say that the contradiction is the beginning of Hazamah, because at no point when the first witnesses contradicted before being rendered Zomamim. Do you want me to repeat that, or do you get the concept? That last sentence.
Repeat the last sentence, sorry. Repeat the last sentence.
As the Gemara says, according to this explanation by Abaye, there is no longer any necessity to say that contradiction is the beginning of the Hazamah, because at no point were the first witnesses contradicted before being rendered Zomamim. So all Abaye is saying is, either because the second witnesses began to testify about the Hazamah of the first ones, and then moved on to contradicting their version of the sequence of the injuries, or because their contradiction of the sequence was followed immediately within the time required for an utterance by a Hazamah testimony. That's according to Tosfot. So what Abaye is saying in a simple language is that you don't need three sets of witnesses. All you need is a second set saying that the first one, they contradict the order in which it happened. They both agree that the master did damage to the slave, freed the slave, but they contradicted the order because they're saying that the first set wanted to get the master to pay less and only pay for the tooth because the eye freed him, according to their claim, when in fact the tooth freed the slave and the master owes for the eye. So what they have to have in their testimony, Gavin, within the time of an utterance is saying, no, it's the reverse order and it happened at a different day. to what you're saying, because you were with us on the day you're claiming it happened. So they have to have both parts. And if it's both parts, you only need two sets of witnesses, and it's counted as one testimony within the time of an utterance or within one court testimony. And therefore, the first set, their goose is cooked, because they're proven to be conspiring about lying about their whereabouts, as well as about the testimony. So it's not contradicted. It's in one statement.
Amen. But shouldn't the second set of witnesses still be verified? They could fabricate the story that they saw them in another location. How does one take their word for it?
The first set could be working for the I don't know which one's which, but the first one could be working for the slave and the second one working for the master, or the other way around. I might have them mixed up.
It's the other way around, but I get what you, Gavin, and you are saying. Both of you are saying is, why do we believe the second set as opposed to the first set? And
even if it's one utterance, it could be two lies in one utterance.
Well, the thing of it is, okay, so we're mixing up three different concepts. The one is what is considered an utterance, where we learned before. If you have two different thought processes, even if it's within a sentence, that's how the rabbis hold, that as soon as two different testimonies with regards to theft and slaughter. But let's not confuse it with this. Let's answer Kevin's and Gavin's right question with the fact that Abaye agrees. That's why he basically generally says that testimony is disregarded from the moment it's uttered to be false. So the thing of it is, there is retroactive testimony from the moment the witnesses testified. But even according to this case, it's a question on both Rava and Abaye, because both of them are turning around and saying that we believe the second set of witnesses about the first. And that was my question to Rav Simcha in the audio that I sent him, which I sent to, I don't know if I sent it to Gavin, where I basically said it doesn't make sense why we believe the second set as opposed to the first. And if you want to say that's the scriptural ordinance, then why should we apply reciprocal penalty to the conspiring witnesses when the second set that said they weren't at those whereabouts could have been lying? You know, especially when it comes to a death penalty case. This isn't money. A person could lose their life. And according to even Rava, the fact that we don't hold by what you call it, retroactive discreditation of testimony is proving this, because there's a novelty that the two sets of witnesses should cancel each other out on the point of disagreement. Suddenly we believe the second set when they say the first set weren't at that location. Why? Why don't they cancel each other out, as Kevin and Gavin are saying? Okay? And Rav Simcha said to me, which I'll send to you on the group, that this is the scriptural ordinance, and we have to go with that above logic. So it's a question that I battle with. I don't quite understand it. It seems, especially if somebody's life is in danger, a very, very hectic thing.
Absolutely.
And it's something I'm battling with. So I don't know what to say. I just need.
You want to tackle it with Rabbi Aran Cohen? Maybe you'll give us a different answer that will maybe be a little bit easier for us to understand. Maybe. I don't mean to disrespect Reb Simcha. I think his answer is probably 100%, but you never know.
Well, I agree, because I asked three different people a question. I got three separate answers on an issue, and Rabbi Rappaport was the best answer I got. Because it was a question, just interestingly enough, on Nasa Vanishma, which I'll tell you now, but let me just finish two lines and then we're done, is according to this explanation, okay, so Abaye proceeds to cite support for his interpretation of the brisa. From where do I know that this case is the case under discussion? From the fact that the latter part of the brisa deals with the case of reversal and hazamah, It may be presumed that the first part of the brisa also deals with the case of reversal and hazamai. So what he's just saying is that if you look at consistency, both cases deal with the fact that there are two sets of witnesses. It would make sense. That's what he's saying as far as he's concerned. All right, so now we've at least covered that full page. I just wanted to do it. So the question I asked in Shavuot is, it says that Hashem holds a mountain over us and was going to squish us unless we accepted the Torah, but yet it offers this view that Hashem offered the Torah to the nations and purposely asked them the question about what was in that particular set of commandments, at which they know that nation wouldn't cope. Okay? And then they didn't accept it, and when the Jews said, we will do and we will hear. And I said it was a very difficult thing, that, because why do you praise them for being so ready to do what they hear when a mountain is on top of them? Why are they that different to the nations? If you would have said to the other nations, I'll kill you unless you follow my ordinances, then they would do that. So, the three answers I was given is by Ari Ginsberg. The one answer was that he held the mountain over our heads so that if we backtracked afterwards because we're going to sin, it was almost under duress we accepted it, and therefore the penalty will be more lenient, which was okay. But then, since he knows our nature,
quite clever, but not mind blowing, but quite clever.
So not bad. And then Rabbi Glass said it uses the word tunnel, means he doesn't hold a mountain over our head; he holds us a tunnel over us, meaning he encapsulated us in an understanding that there is no real free choice. It's just an illusion of free choice. And if we understand the consequences, that it's like putting your hand in the fire in the stove, it would be that stupid, then you're not going to come to sin anyway. But then that just reinforces my question with Rabbi Glass, because if you know there's no choice because you can see the error of your ways, why is there praise at having followed it? Because in the time of Mashiach, we're not going to get reward for doing the obvious things right, because it will be detrimental to our soul if we don't. And then further to which, when Rabbi Rappaport brought up this issue on Shabbos for Jeff Kaplan as part of a shir in his memory, he said that we were shown all the malachim, we were shown the malachim and the heavenly throne and the spheros and all sorts of other things to let us be in awe and know that this in fact was absolute truth. And I said to him that the question then even remains the same as with Rabbi Glass. He said, no, well, he learned from his rabbi that even at a moment where somebody is sure, like for example, he didn't use this example, I'm using this as example, is you're in love with a girl and you know she's right for you. Many of us don't get this clarity, but say somebody gets the source to do that, and you know she's right and you're excited to marry her. She's an easygoing woman, which would make her a unicorn. But let's just say such a thing happened and whatever. And she was hot and tzedakis and all the rest, and you knew she was the one and she loved you, and you knew you couldn't get a date in 5 years up until that point, and you probably wouldn't get a date again because you looked like Beauty and the Beast and she was the Beauty and you were the Beast in this Disney film. And at the end of the day, she wanted to marry you, and you would, as much as you'd want to, because there's no question that this is right and you're excited, there's part of you where your Yetzer Hara kicks in and say, no, I can't do that. Something's wrong. Something's off. So he said the Yetzer Hara is built, even in the moment where you have free choice, to give you this nagging doubt. And therefore Hashem had to just put that extra thing. We knew we really wanted to accept it, but the Yetzer Hara was doing its work just to kind of also push us that level further. And that made the most sense to me. Because I know
I think it's the strongest. It's the strongest. Still difficult to understand, because Hashem could have just taken the Yetzer Hara off from us for that moment, so there wouldn't have been an issue.
Yeah, but then it wouldn't have answered the question of how he accepted it with absolute.
So
after we accepted, did we only accept it once he said that we're going to lift the mountains and get the order right?
Yeah, so the thing of it is, it still holds a difficulty, but it does explain human nature a little bit better. It still doesn't sit 100% well with me. But the point we're trying to bring this across, Kevin, is that we don't understand why scriptural ordinance would overthrow logic, especially if there would be a reciprocal death penalty, and the first set were innocent and in fact did witness them. I battle with this one. I have to ask Rabbi Ranka this question.
Try one more. If we still don't get absolute clarity, then that's it. That's all we can do.
Oh, what about Dan? What's his name in Migdala Emek?
So the reason I want to ask about Cohen specifically, as far as this is concerned, is that because Rabbi Cohen writes this exam, one of the few in the world, on Shas, where he has to remember it off by heart. There's only a couple of people there's not a lot of people that do it, where they can test him on any part of Shas at any given moment. At that point, he's one of the experts, and Dan's expertise lies in other areas, but because he teaches and he learns, I don't want to take his time away from research, whereas Rabbi Cohen would be probably not without having to use much time. And I would rather use both those Rabbonim's time less to answer this question if possible. Therefore, Rabbi Cohen would be the choice. Not that Dan wouldn't find the answer, but the fact of it is that this is Rabbi Cohen's thing that he probably know pretty much off by heart. It's his speciality. Each one has a speciality. And Arthur, I just want to see you for the camera before we cut off.
So Damon,
you well, my friend.
Is that his nose, or is that his hand stick like above the?
I can't see that Arthur's even attending. I just see a blur vision.
No, he's there. Well, he's
his phone lying on the table.
Yeah.
Just pointing at the roof.
So Damon.
All right. Yeah.
Is he Dan, the man who wasn't born in Japan but has a plan?
That's it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you think of these things like on the spot. It's quite sharp.
I said that to a girl I was dating. She said, "Why are you trying?" He said, "That's not funny." You can't. You guys appreciate it. Not insulting anybody.
As I said, a unicorn to find such a mate.
Well, please God, we all meet